Welcome to The Backstory, a podcast from the North Dakota News Cooperative that takes an in-depth look at the stories we're reporting for you. I'm Sabrina Halverson, CEO of the North Dakota News Cooperative. Joining me is Michael Standert, our lead reporter. Today we're talking about the story titled Ukrainians Face Slow Walk Out the Door as Status Expires. So this week we have an update to a story that you worked on a few weeks ago, which looked at the fate of Ukrainians here in North Dakota. And you have followed a few people and what they're going through. So tell our podcast listeners a little bit about the update to the Ukrainian story.
Yeah, so the previous story was more about how the changes or the possible changes to the Ukrainian parolee program could impact businesses and workforce in the state. I was not able to get a hold of actual Ukrainians to talk about their situation at the time. So I've been working on trying to get people to talk, and it was difficult. People weren't necessarily wanting to talk about the situation, but now things have changed a bit. So people are slowly losing their status. So under the Ukrainian Uniting for Ukraine program, they're allowed 2 years in the US and they can work during that time. They're legally allowed to work. So some people are either coming up close to that deadline or are past the deadline. And I was able to find some people to talk with about that. So when they come up to the deadline or pass it, they are no longer legally allowed to work in the US. They can stay here. They have other processes they go through to stay, but they can't work. So it's become a very troubling situation for them. They are uncertain about whether they'd have to go back to Ukraine. They're concerned about paying their bills. This one woman who's past the deadline now has a teenage son in high school. They'd like to stay to at least get him through high school and then figure out where to go. She and her husband are here with their son. They're from Kyiv. It's in eastern Ukraine. It's a very heavily bombed area. So they don't know if they could go back to that area. Another person who is about a year away, he's from Mariupol, and he came with his mother and his grandmother. That area where they're from, they spent months hunkered down under a house while neighbors were being killed around them. It took them a while to get out of Mariupol, and through checkpoints, through minefields, they ended up in Kyiv, and then they went to Lithuania and Germany, and they ended up in the US, and they can't go back to Mariupol. It's occupied. So what happens to people like them? They're unsure. Another person is about 2 weeks away from reaching the deadline. He's a truck driver, construction worker. And right before the war started, his superior officer had let some of the soldiers know that he expected the Russians to attack. During that period, there were tensions, and they thought the Russians would come in, and they had built up on the border there. He and his mother and sister fled to Poland. The area he's from is not safe, both from the war, and it's a bit of a lawless area. There's a lot of stories online about this area with amber mining. So there's a lot of organized crime involved in the amber mining in his area. It's not a very safe place to go back to.
Yeah. I'd like to get a feeling for, as you spoke to each of these people, give us a little bit of a behind the scenes look. I know there are probably some things that you can't disclose, but overall, are they emotional as they talk about their situation, or are they reserved? One of the people you spoke with had a condition of speaking under remaining anonymous for her own safety and the safety of her family. Tell us a little bit about that and just how receptive are they to speaking with the US media?
I would say the feeling I get is they're mystified by the situation. They don't necessarily like talking about the troubles they've been through. They don't feel they should have some kind of special status. They want to live and work. They think since they did enter this program, they think they should be here and be protected until they can sort out their situation and either go back to Ukraine after the war or stay here. They thought what they were getting into was a safe harbor where they could live and work and contribute until it was safe to go back. The overall feeling I get from them is they're just mystified by how they were embraced when they got here and how things have changed under the Trump administration to create a lot of uncertainty about their future.
I'm curious if they're noticing just changes within the administration, the obvious changes with the laws and things, or if they're also noticing change within their neighbors and society. Are they feeling more pressure from society as well, or has that support remained the same? And that may not be a question that you can answer, but I'm curious about that.
Yeah, I think they feel welcome still by their neighbors and by people they know and their sponsors. All these people have sponsors who have paid a lot for getting them here, for settling here. Those people are mystified too. They don't know what they can really tell them. It's like they were the ones who invited them here and wanted them to be safe, but they can't really give them any answers either. So they're all pretty confused as well. But for the most part, I think their neighbors and people they're in touch with on a daily basis are very supportive. It's different for employers too. For employers that maybe have larger staffs and can help facilitate a different process to change their status to some kind of work status, those companies have been doing something like that. But for many of them who are just maybe one person working at a healthcare center or whatever as a cleaner, or this one works as a pastry chef, those employers don't really have the power or the knowledge or the money to go through the bureaucratic process of changing their visa over to a different status. So it's the people who are in these jobs that are at smaller companies that have maybe a more problematic situation.
Hmm. And then the other thing I wanted to ask you about for our kind of behind the scenes look at journalism, when you're dealing with somebody, a source for a story who, for their safety, wants to remain anonymous, what are some steps that you go through to verify that they are who they say they are?
I talked to the sponsors who sponsored them. I found out their real name and talked to other people around them. So I know who they are. We don't want to give their identity away for several reasons. They're just uncomfortable with it, and it could affect their status in some way. We don't know. So you just try to talk to people around them to verify their story and who know their story and who know who they are. That's essentially what you do. But as a reporter in China, I had many times had to protect people who may have been targeted by the government or were just very concerned about their situation where they could potentially face some blowback, even if it didn't come to pass that they would get some blowback. People are just worried about using their name at times. So you just have to be cognizant of that and try to protect them. I think it's important to protect people who are in a situation like that.
Hmm. Right. And we have seen some pushback and some activities that could be considered retaliation from people toward people who have spoken out against things for this administration. So I can see why that would be a concern for somebody. And also, I think just as Americans, it would be very hard for a lot of us to truly understand what these Ukrainians are going through because we've never been in a situation like this. We've never been threatened with being in a situation like this. It's a little bit more difficult, I think, for a lot of us to really understand what is that like being in a completely foreign place, not knowing what's going on actually in your home, if your home even still stands, if your neighbors are alive or dead, if your family is alive or dead. So stories like this, keeping us updated on what those people are going through in our communities, they have really integrated into our communities. They work here, they live here, they're part of our neighborhoods now, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So thank you for doing that follow-up. And will there be more follow-ups as the story changes?
Potentially, yeah, we'll keep an eye on things and hopefully keep updated with some of the people who are going through this situation. I know the situation is also happening elsewhere. I've seen some stories from Iowa and I think Maine, just similar stories across the US. So we'll just
Yeah.
keep an eye on it. And yeah, I know the Trump administration has not made a decision on expelling Ukrainian parolees as it's made a decision on some other humanitarian parolees. But
Yeah.
I think the feeling that I get from people is okay, they're being slow walked and forced into a situation where they'll have to self-deport. If they run out of money, they might not be able to pay their bills if they can't work anymore. In a sense, they feel like a decision has been made, even though a decision has not been made. If
Yeah,
that
okay.
makes sense. I think that's one of the more concerning things for them too, because they can't plan for their future if they have all this uncertainty. Yeah, we'll definitely keep an eye on the situation.
And that story once again titled Ukrainians Face Slow Walk Out the Door as Status Expires. You can read that story on our website at newscoopnd.org or in one of our local newspaper partners. For the North Dakota News Cooperative, I'm Sabrina Halverson. This has been The Backstory.